Hello YouTube, I'm back and this is a follow-up video to my last one. The previous video that I recorded, I discussed a specific breathing technique, the 478 breathing technique, and how to use that. In this follow-up video I would like to discuss some ways that one can practically and deliberately utilize this in addition to just using it to generally relax, whether in or outside of a situation. So the format I think that I'll be using to discuss this, I think how to use the breathing technique, and I'm going to refer specifically to the 478 breathing technique. There are other breathing techniques as well. There are also other relaxation techniques. I'm not discussing these, although I think, of course, the same methodology might be used for other breathing techniques or relaxation techniques. Okay, so before, during, and after. All right, so I think that during is maybe the easiest, the quickest one to discuss. And when you are in a situation that is stressful, to then just do the breathing technique within that situation, so that the body doesn't have the elevated physiological markers of stress, and that that elevated state of emotion does not become encoded as part of the memory. So if you're in a stressful situation, you can just deliberately do the breathing technique, of course, if it is possible to do so. One of the unfortunate side effects of stress and anxiety is that we do not think very clearly. And the higher the stress goes, the more applicable this idea is that we don't think clearly. All right, so during a stressful situation, to do the breathing technique. All right, how to work with the anticipation of a situation. So if we know that we are going to be in a situation or confronted with a relationship or an event that we know we find quite anxiety provoking, one of the ways that is often used in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is not the type of therapy that I usually practice, but that I am familiar with nonetheless, is to do a kind of prospective practice. So the way I would suggest that you go about utilizing this is to imagine yourself within that situation, and then try to pay attention to your own physical reaction. So let's say your throat constricts, or your tummy contracts, or there's a tightness across your chest, or one of the other possible markers of stress and strain. So to pay attention to how your body reacts to the imagination, or imagining yourself in that difficult situation. So let me make use of a practical example. So let's say I have to go and do some public speaking. I myself am not particularly fond of public speaking, so this is something that is maybe applicable to me, but to many other people as well. Of course, you can change your situation. It can be something extremely stressful, like, let's say you are a law enforcement officer and you know that you're going to go on some kind of raid or inspection of a dangerous premises tomorrow, and you are beset with anxiety and stress and strain. So if you know ahead what that situation is going to be like, you can make use of this. It can be any situation that you can imagine somewhere in the future. So you imagine yourself in that situation. So in my example, I'll imagine myself maybe standing in front of a crowd of people, or if I know what the venue looks like, to imagine myself in that venue. I will pay attention to the physiological markers of stress in my body, Uh, I would also then suggest that once you have identified these physiological markers, that you attribute what we call a subjective unit of the stress score. So from 0 to 10, where 10 is it's impossible for the stress or strain or anxiety to be any higher, and 0, it's impossible for it to be any lower. So between those two extremes, to rate yourself once you've imagined yourself in that stressful situation. So let's say I imagine myself speaking in front of an audience. I can feel a kind of strange feeling in my solar plexus, and I would rate it as, say, a 6. So a subjective unit of the stress score of 6 out of 10. Then I would do the breathing. Now, please refer to my previous video as to how to do the breathing, but I do the breathing technique. Once I've done my set of breathing cycles, and I suggested in my video a minimum of 3 minutes, I then check my subjective unit of the stress again, and I discover, oh, okay, so it's really gone down significantly. It's down to, let's say, a 3. What I do then is I deliberately imagine myself back in that situation again. One of the very natural responses to a situation that is stressful is avoidance. So this is something that we generally don't want to do. We don't want to actually imagine or expose ourselves to that stressful situation, whether in the real world or in imagination. Often people might rationalize this or justify this by saying, I'll deal with it once I get there. Sure, if that is what you are comfortable with, but obviously the suggestion has to do with, or is for people who would rather deliberately prepare themselves emotionally and physiologically for a situation. So instead of avoiding that, imagining it again, you deliberately imagine again. And perhaps you discover that, your subjective unit or your SUD score is the same. So I imagine myself speaking again, and I do my breathing again, and it goes down again to 3, maybe even lower, maybe slightly higher. I imagine it again. Over time, the physiological markers will indicate a lowering of our distress. Let me just maybe say something about the notion of exposure. So cognitive behavioral therapy, and this is one of the staple techniques of CBT, is that when we are fearful or anxious about the situation or an object or a relationship or something that it affects, that within certain parameters, one would deliberately and gradually expose yourself to that situation. And doing this deliberately and continuously, the level of stress and the stress would diminish. So here we are making use of doing it in imagination. So prospective, working with the prospective anxiety or the anticipatory anxiety. You anticipate it, you imagine it, you do your breathing until it reaches a point where you feel that level of anxiety is tolerable. Of course, let's use the same example to speak a little bit more about exposure. Let's say I arrive at the venue where I'm about to do my public speaking a little bit early. I notice that I am stressed again. Now, what I've managed to do with imagining myself in that situation is not to completely avoid the stress, but to avoid that the stress really ruins my time before the event, and contributes to all kinds of physiological changes that over time might actually have detrimental health implications. So I'm at the venue, I notice my own distress, and I do the breathing again. and I can continue doing that until at such a time I feel comfortable enough, or where, of course, I am left without any particular choice and I have to go and do my public speaking. So this is working with distress or stress or anxiety or fear in anticipation. Okay, what about working with events in the past? Well, instead of imagining, of course, we can remember. So we remember an event that we found particularly difficult. We do the same thing. We notice our physiological response. We score it. We do the breathing. And again, you do it again. You repeat this. So it's exposing yourself to a calming influence in association with memory. All right, so this is a way to go ahead and use the breathing technique deliberately. Maybe a little bit more about the latter application, working with past events. Working with events that are really traumatic, I would honestly suggest that if you at all have the choice, that you do not do this on your own. Speaking as a psychotherapist, it is better to be in the company of somebody who is positively inclined towards you and who is capable to evaluate you from a less subjective point of view, and who can manage the situation without being influenced by the same conscious or subconscious emotions. So I would not necessarily suggest that you use this breathing technique to try and work with significant trauma in the past. This is maybe for events that have been stressful. Let's say you were chewed out by your boss in front of the office, the rest of the office. Now, again, for some people that might in fact constitute a trauma, depending on their history and their psychological state at the moment. But in general, that is probably not outside the realm of usual human experience. So I would not classify that as trauma or the kind of thing that is likely to lead to something like post-traumatic stress disorder. I leave this up to your judgment. I am not there to discuss this with you and to help you evaluate whether it's trauma or not. I think if you have a history of trauma, I would actually suggest that you aim for low-hanging fruit, that you try to de-stress or to couple relaxation with memories that are really relatively low on the SUD scale. I would say nothing higher than, well, conservatively speaking, nothing higher than a 6. Yeah. All right, so this is a way to deliberately use the relaxing breath technique, the 4-7-8-1, in a way to try and relieve stress within a situation, in anticipation of a situation, or the memory of a situation. There are many other ways to also work with these type of events, but I thought it would be useful for you to have a particular way to apply the breathing technique. Again, thank you for watching. Thank you for your time. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them. Please feel free to subscribe to this channel if you found anything that I've said useful, interesting. And I hope to see you in the next video, so to speak. All right, have a good day. Bye-bye.